Hello, fourth graders. It's Mr. Remedies coming to you today from my secret hideout in the Casa de Remedies for another mini lesson here in Reading Language Arts. Today, our mini lesson is all centered around how writers use poetic or descriptive language to help us better understand the settings of their stories. As always, we have a couple of learning goals and some success criteria. So let's get to those. So today we are learning to notice and understand the poetic or descriptive language used to understand the setting of a story. This goal can be achieved with some I can statements, like I can define the word poetic. I can identify language as descriptive, very important, and I can determine the setting of a story. Boom, there we go. Pretty easy there. Let's move on to some examples. Before we get to those examples, let's define the word poetic. Poetic is defined as having an imaginative or sensitive style of expression. So we can determine if language is poetic or descriptive if it really helps us use our senses or imagine using our senses to understand the setting. So if you think to yourself, these words really do help me see, smell, taste, and feel what's going on in the story, especially the setting. If you can, through the author's word choice, if you can really, see where the story is taking place, or if the author is describing the smell of something that is in the setting, and you know exactly what that smell is like, or you can imagine that smell, then we can define that as poetic language and therefore descriptive language. Now, let's go on to those examples. All right, guys, so we are going to look at an example from our book from long ago called Snook Alone. Y'all remember Snook Alone? A wonderful story about a friendship between a dog named Snook and his owner, Abba Jacob, and that Snook gets kind of marooned or left on a tiny little island and begins to wait for Abba Jacob to return. So let's look at an example, a wonderful, wonderful example of how the author is using descriptive and poetic language to really help you understand the setting of the story. So I'll be reading from page 10 and a little bit from page 11. Okay? Like the other islands, Avakar was a mile-long crescent of beach surrounding a higher ground of Pimphis marshes, salt-resistant bushes, papaya and casuarina trees, and coconut palms, with bare guano-covered circles where boobies, frigate birds, and terns nested. What great micing! Snook had never worked so hard. A black line thickened on the horizon. The mood of the sea darkened. Ripples became waves. Waves became breakers. Abba Jacob hurried toward the boat, whistling and calling, "Snooky boy! Come, Snook, come!" And so in this passage, I got a question there, right there on the screen for you. Which words help you imagine the setting? Right? Which words imagine the setting? I think that I'm going to think about that. I think the expression mile long crescent of beach. Okay? I think that starts to help me imagine. I know how long a mile is. It's really, really long. I know what a crescent is. We've had that word before in a couple of other lessons and readings. Right? I think salt-resistant bushes, papaya and casuarina trees. I know what salt-resistant bushes are. They're going to be ones that are very harsh, not to let the salt get into their trunks. And what does those words show? I think that shows us what the beach looks like. I think the beach, because it is crescent, it curves a little bit. Okay? It's not very big beach. It's probably a little thin beach, but it curves. Okay? I know that there are many different types of beaches because it says plants, I'm sorry. It says salt-resistant bushes, papaya, and casuarina trees. Those are all very different looking. Okay? Which other words help you imagine the setting? On page 11, it says a black line thickened on the horizon. What does that help us imagine? What does that help us know about the setting? Hmm. If you guys think that, or said at your screen that a storm is coming, I think you're right on track. Okay? I like a black line thickened. It just, gets closer and closer and gets thicker and thicker. I can really imagine that storm just hustling up on the island. Okay? Let's look at one more. So our second example comes from Symphony of Wales. So let's take a look at page 7 and listen for some descriptive language as I read. The sled dogs pulled harder. Their keen ears could pick up high-pitched notes that most humans couldn't hear. But Glashka, if she turned just right, could make out the eerie moans and whistles that grew louder until even her parents could hear them. The dogs stopped short. They were right at the edge of a great bay of open water, surrounded on all sides by ice and snow. Everywhere Glashka looked, the water seemed to be heaving and boiling, choked with white whales. Her father came up beside her. "Beluga whales," he said softly. What does the author want you to feel, see, hear, and know about this place that the story is taking place? Can you think of it? We use some great descriptive language. So I noticed that there was the expression the great bay of open water surrounded on all sides by ice and snow. If something is great, we can use that. Obviously, you know that it can be a synonym of good or awesome, but when an author uses great to describe a place, it's also talking about size. So if something is great, like the Great Wall of China, the Great Wall of China is a huge wall, So if I see that the author says there was a great bay of open water, well, I can imagine that bay is very big, huge, enormous, ginormous, some would even say. And it was surrounded on all sides by ice and snow. So I can, if something is surrounded, I always kind of picture like a curved shape. For whatever reason, I know it doesn't have to be a curve, but I know that it is starting to be kind of boxed in. So I can really, really imagine what the words are showing, how cold and icy the setting is. Right? What else did you guys notice in our reading? If you guys said the water seemed to be heaving and boiling, choked with white whales. Oh man, what a great expression. What a great use of poetic language. The water seemed to be heaving, like jumping up and down. You're heaving something, right? Or throwing, and boiling. You guys seen your mom or dad boil some eggs or some spaghetti. That water gets like bubbles and it gets very like violent and there's a lot of action going on in the water. And choked with white whales. Like if something is choking, that means it's overtaking it. It's overcoming. Like, if you see someone choking on a piece of food, that means it's clogging. That food is clogging their throat and they can't breathe. Or if you see vines choking a tree, that means they've covered it up and it can't move, it can't escape. So, holy smokes, this is a wonderful expression that the author uses. What's it making me see, hear, and know about this place, though? It's making me feel all the feels, though. It's making me feel that there are a lot of whales stuck in the bay and just how many there are. You can't say something's being choked if there's not a whole lot of stuff going on there. So I think this author uses amazing descriptive language here. Man, I want to read more about this. I've got to go reread it. All right. So we can see really how the author is using a lot of descriptive language to appeal to our senses. Now that we've seen some examples, let's go on to a review, and then we'll have an activity for you all to try. So as a review, when we say language is poetic, we mean it is very descriptive and appeals to our senses. Poetic and descriptive language helps us imagine the setting to better help us understand it, and poetic and descriptive language helps the reader see, hear, feel, and understand the setting better. Right? I've been Mr. Radies from my secret hideout, and we will see you later. Bye, fourth grade.